1939, the stage for war has been set. Poland signed a mutual assistance treaty with Britain nearly a month before Nazi Germany invades. Shortly after, the Soviet Union also marches into Poland, dividing the country in two. Over the following months and years, Nazi, Allied, and Soviet forces spread violently through Europe, dissolving borders and creating three distinct territories. Finally, in the summer of 1941, Nazi Germany attacks the Soviet Union, separating Europe into two states of control, Nazi and Allied. The story I am about to share with you begins in Poland, near the city of Krakow. Beginning in 1940, a maleficent place was born, and continued to grow until 1942. The atrocities of this young concentration camp were merely a foreshadowing of the indescribable horrors to follow. 65 years later, the camp still exists, as a dark reminder of what happened. School children from all over Poland visit the site every year, and thousands of visitors from other countries pour through the gates that once held thousands upon thousands of innocent people captive. The day began in the middle of Krakow, a scorching 38 degrees and an 80-minute bus ride through Polish countryside to arrive at the camp. When you arrive, you pass through the visitor center, which was once like purgatory for newcomers. This is where the first fateful decisions were made about each and every prisoner. From here, they enter the camp and will eventually pass through the infamous gates. Arbeit macht's frei, the Iron Gate claims. Work will set you free, the false promise the Nazis made to prisoners of this camp. Beyond these gates, people were housed in conditions that would eventually be the end of them, predominantly starvation. Again, this was a precursor of worse things to come. Beyond the gates, the camp consisted of 22 pre-war brick barracks buildings. The approximate capacity of the first camp was 20,000 people, 1,000 per barracks. This left 2 barracks for more nefarious purposes. As you pass through the gates, there is a place where prisoners who were employed by their captors played marching music. To be part of the band, you would receive small benefits, a little extra food, or a little longer to live. They played each morning and evening as the prisoners went to and came back from the work camps. Prisoners were not permitted to be anywhere other than on the paths or in their barracks. The gravel you see around was known as the kill zone. If prisoners ventured onto this area, soldiers had strict instructions to execute them. This often took form in 2 ways. Prisoners would rush at it to free themselves from the inhumane treatment they received in the camp, and there were also stories from various camps of Nazi officers taking the hat from a prisoner's head and throwing it into the kill zone, then instructing the prisoner to get it. Nazi officers might get more leave time for this, as they prevented an escape attempt. This is where roll call would happen. Soldiers would have prisoners line up, row on row, and every name of every prisoner would be called. Prisoners would have to carry their sick and injured cellmates if they could not walk there themselves. If there was a single person missing, the entire group would have to stand and wait until the officers located the missing person. Season and time of day did not matter to the officers as they could change shift as need be. One of the longest roll calls was midwinter and lasted 19 hours. Prisoners dressed only in light clothing and shoes. Experiments were planned at the highest levels to meet the needs of the army. Some were intended to improve the state of soldiers' health, or post-war plans including population policy, or to reinforce the basis of racial ideology, including advancing views as to the superiority of the Nordic race. Aside from experiments planned at the highest levels, many Nazi officers and doctors experimented on prisoners on behalf of German pharmaceutical companies or medical institutes, others in pursuit of their personal interests or to advance their academic careers. Punishments and executions that happened at the camp included flogging, banning of letters and parcels, making prisoners squat while supporting heavy objects, and starvation. At times, group punishments would occur, such as roll call, physical exercise, labor. Prisoners not fit for transfer or that did not follow the strict rules of the Nazi officers would be executed. This was done either by shooting, hanging, or starvation. In Block 11, some of the worst punishments were dealt. Prisoners would be forced into regular cells, dark cells, standing cells, and most appalling, the 4 spaces measuring less than 1 square meter each. The only source of air was a 5 by 5 centimeter opening covered with a metal grill. Up to 4 prisoners would be forced to occupy the space. Often none of them survived. Between 1942 and 1944, the camp evolved into an even more grotesque creature, an extermination camp. It quickly became the largest center for immediate, mass killing facility the Nazis had. A common misconception is that only Jewish people were gathered and transferred into the camps and death camps. In fact, the camps held several major groups that the Nazis viewed as a plague on society, including Jews, Poles, Sinti and Roma, or Gypsies, Soviet prisoners of war, Jehovah's Witnesses, the disabled, the homosexual, mentally handicapped, and citizens from a range of European countries, including Germans and Austrians that did not fit in the Lebensraum. Prisoners were identified by a marker, often a triangle, sewn to their clothing. Each one meaning a different thing. Red for political prisoners, green for criminals, black for asocial people, such as prostitutes, purple for Jehovah's Witnesses, pink for homosexuals, and Jews were often marked with an upside-down red triangle overlapping a yellow triangle. Once the first camp clearly could not house as many prisoners as needed, or exterminate as many as needed, a second camp was created, Birkenau. Birkenau was the largest of all the Auschwitz camps. About 90% of the victims murdered died in Birkenau. As you cross through the gates, you see what seems like endless fields filled with barracks meant to house prisoners. The maximum capacity was approximately 125,000 prisoners, and the camp covered a vast 175 acres. If you were sent here, you came by train. Cars filled beyond capacity. If you survived the transportation, you arrived here, the middle of Birkenau, and were separated. A Nazi doctor would determine who was fit to work and who would be sent immediately to the gas chambers. Birkenau eventually would have 4 gas chambers and crematoria. An estimated 1.6 million people could be executed and burned every year. Jews, 75,000 Poles, 21,000 Gypsies, 15,000 Soviets, and 15,000 others. Near the middle of Birkenau, by the crumbled remains of gas chambers and crematoria, a memorial stands. Plaques written in many languages serve as a memory and a warning to humanity of what happened there. Forever let this place be a cry of despair and the warning to humanity. Dieser Ort sei allerzeit ein Aufschrei der Weißerflug. Que celui qui les nazis un assassin un million. Legenes hererog. Jau qui altas es intes es empirisch Laat deze plaats er weer kruid van. Van Hupschen en de waarschuwing aan de mensheid. Shukjem rozpaczy, prosto gadlaci. Toto isto načita Shukjem rozpaczy, prosto gadlaci. Shukjem rozpaczy, prosto gadlaci. Shukjem rozpaczy, prosto gadlaci. Shukjem rozpaczy, prosto Forever let this place be a cry of despair and the warning to humanity. When the Nazis murdered about 1.5 million men, women, and children, mainly Jews, in this country.